Imagine a small town, a place where your name is already written in a ledger of expectation long before you learn to spell it. This is Hawkins, Indiana, and for a boy named Eddie Munson, the ledger had a single, damning entry: trouble. His story, a tapestry woven from heavy metal t-shirts, frantic guitar solos, and a heart far too big for the rusty trailer he called home, is not the story of a hero in the traditional sense. It is, instead, a heartbreaking documentary of unfulfilled potential, a symphony that was forever cut off just as the musician was finally finding his true rhythm. His triumphant, desperate cry of "This is my year" echoes not as a victory chant but as the poignant, tragic thesis of a life perpetually on the verge of a breakthrough that fate would cruelly deny him. To understand Eddie is to understand what it means to be forever labeled, to be seen not for what you are but for what you represent to a system that has no room for outliers. From his first introduction, bouncing on a picnic table with a loudspeaker, selling illicit goods to fund his only true passion, Eddie existed on the fringes. He was the head of the Hellfire Club, a band of fellow outcasts who found family in the complex rules of a fantasy game. To the parents and principals of Hawkins, he was a freak, a burnout, a senior repeating his final year for the third time. They saw the long hair, the denim vest clattering with patches of demons and dragons, and they made up their minds. What they refused to see was the intelligence humming beneath that wild exterior. As a dungeon master, Eddie was a storyteller, a strategist, a leader. He created worlds and guided his friends through epic narratives of good versus evil, teaching them about bravery, loyalty, and clever thinking without any of them even realizing they were learning. In the cafeteria of Hawkins High, he was a pariah. In the basement with his friends around a table, he was a master of ceremonies, a general, a god. This was his first, and perhaps most painful, layer of unfulfilled potential, a brilliant, creative mind dismissed and condemned by a world that valued conformity over genius in any form that didn't fit a neat, pre-approved box. His passion was music, specifically the thrashing, aggressive, misunderstood world of heavy metal. For Eddie, metal wasn't just noise. It was a language. It was the sound of frustration, of anger at injustice, of screaming back at a world that tried to silence you. He dreamed of one day cutting a record with his band, Corroded Coffin, of escaping the grim shadow of his family name and the small-mindedness of Hawkins in a blaze of guitar solos and roaring engines. Yet, even here, potential was stifled. They played at dingy bars for sparse, unenthusiastic crowds. Their gear was patchy, their opportunities non-existent. The dream was a distant star he was constantly reaching for, but the gravitational pull of his reputation and poverty kept him grounded. His guitar playing was raw, powerful, and full of feeling, a direct conduit from his chaotic soul. But in Hawkins, that sound was just another reason for people to cross the street. So he channeled that creative fire into his campaign, into being the ringleader for his band of misfits, his performance never finding the larger audience it so desperately craved. Then, the unthinkable happened. The quiet new kid, Mike Wheeler, and his friends needed a dungeon master. In a moment of pure, defiant Eddie-ness, he welcomed them in, seeing not the popular kids but fellow adventurers. This simple act of inclusion would tie his fate irrevocably to the secret, supernatural war raging beneath Hawkins. When Chrissy Cunningham, the perfect cheerleader with a smile that hid a world of private torment, died horrifically in his trailer, Eddie's worst nightmare became reality. The town's boogeyman had a face, and it was his. Every prejudice, every whispered fear about the freak was suddenly confirmed in the eyes of the mob. He was forced to run, becoming the most wanted man in Indiana for a crime of unspeakable evil he did not commit. The tragedy deepens here, for in his flight, he began to show the very heroism the town was certain he lacked. He was terrified, utterly and completely, and the show let us feel every second of his panic. This was no stoic action hero, this was a scared kid, hiding in lakes and stealing food, whose world had been shattered by a horror he could not explain. It is in this hellscape, hiding in the criminal boathouse of his friend Rick, that Eddie Munson delivers his manifesto. Frustrated, angry, and heartsick, he rants to his loyal friend Dustin Henderson. He talks about how he always runs from confrontation. From responsibility. He is painfully self-aware, seeing the pattern of his own life, always the outcast, always the suspect, always on the defensive. And then, with a fire igniting in his eyes, he declares it, "This is my year, Henderson." I mean it. The statement is devastating. It is the rallying cry of every underdog who has ever been counted out. He wasn't talking about graduating, he was talking about finally facing the music, about not running anymore, about standing his ground and changing the narrative of his own life. It was a promise to himself to finally fulfill that potential that had been simmering for so long. He just needed the chance to prove it. His chance, tragically, would come not in a graduation gown or on a concert stage, but in the upside down. When the plan to defeat Vecna required a distraction, Eddie, the perpetual runaway, volunteered. It was the ultimate act of stepping into the role he had always played fictionally. With his guitar strapped on and an amplifier dragged into a nightmare dimension, he prepared for the most important performance of his life. The sequence that follows is one of the most pure, unadulterated moments of character triumph in modern television. On a rooftop wreathed in storm clouds of an alien dimension, Eddie Munson played Metallica's Master of Puppets. He wasn't just playing notes, he was screaming back at every person who ever called him worthless. He was conducting an orchestra of chaos, using the very music that marked him as an outcast as a weapon to save the town that hated him. In that moment, every bit of his passion, his creativity, his showmanship, and his heart coalesced. The potential was not just fulfilled, it was surpassed in a blaze of glory. He was a rock god, a hero, a master of his own destiny, finally and utterly magnificent. And that is where the profound tragedy solidifies. Having finally stopped running, having finally proven himself beyond his own wildest dreams, fate intervened with brutal irony. The plan worked too well. The demons came, and in a final, desperate act to protect Dustin, Eddie made the ultimate sacrifice. He died in the dust of the Upside Down, in the arms of his best friend, telling him to look after the other sheep who didn't fit the flock. The boy who cried "This is my year" never got to see the sun rise on that new chapter. His name was never cleared for the town. For most of Hawkins, he died as he lived, guilty. The potential so magnificently realized in that single, heroic act was instantly snuffed out. There would be no redemption tour, no reconciliation, no album cut, no proud walk across a stage. There was only a quiet grief among the few who knew the truth, and a legacy of bravery known only to a handful of kids. Eddie Munson's story, therefore, is the ultimate tragedy of unfulfilled potential, not because he lacked it, but because the world was too blind to see it until it was too late. He was a leader without an army, a musician without a stage, a hero without a medal. He spent his life screaming into a void that only echoed back his own fears, and the one time his scream became a roar that shook the heavens. It cost him everything. His year was not a span of months, but a single, fleeting moment on a hellish rooftop. He showed us that heroes don't always wear capes, sometimes they wear battle vests and wield guitars. He taught us that the loudest voice in the room is often masking the most fragile heart. And in his final act, he proved that the greatest potential can sometimes be found in the most unlikely places, a bright, fierce flame that burns twice as bright for half as long, leaving behind a searing afterimage of what could have been. And the haunting, beautiful echo of a promise, "This is my year." For Eddie Munson, it was. And it was enough to make him unforgettable.